This was a labor of love for me putting together. Dr. Doss said it started about 2 years ago. It didn't start 2 years ago. It started 23 years ago when my dad died and I found out he had Alzheimer's disease. And so he's my age, dies from Alzheimer's disease, cancer and Alzheimer's and heart disease. And it started this pathway that not only have I been on, but you guys have been on, some of you for 20 years with me. And so tonight is really a culmination. I'm going to go back to my teaching days when I used to teach in chiropractic college, because we're going to talk about a lot of things. And I'm just going to ask you that it should feel a little bit like a fire hose when we do this. But what I have done is I've gone and above and beyond. You'll see right here, all those QR codes are all handouts that we put together for you. So every single topic, every single thing that you can imagine, the PowerPoint's going to be in there, like action steps, anything that I talk about, different parts of the brain, there will be handouts that say, okay, if this is what you identify as your brain there, what you can do to support yourself, what activities, ways that you can talk to yourself, ways that you can talk to other people. So this is not meant to end tonight. So this is really an introduction. And there will be like I'll do some webinars on, relationships or nutrition. We'll do like nutrition for the brain. But I really wanted to introduce this concept to you guys tonight to help you understand how important it is. Okay? So you guys ready for the fire hose? Yeah. Okay. So just so you know, these are QR codes. I kind of like these because you can use your phone. So keep this. It has, and you'll talk on here. You'll see there's different. You'll understand what the PFC is eventually. You'll understand what the AC is eventually. These are different areas of your brain that are kind of cheat sheets that I put together. You'll see there's on this side there's all the resources that you need, and then I put a couple things in here, like one of the things like my sugar challenge, and the sugar challenge in there, and little handouts things that you can actually do. One of the things I find is a lot of times people will come to a class, they'll come to learn something, but they'll be like, Dr. Osborne, that was a great class. I'm like, thank you. And I'm like, what have you done? I'm like, well, I'm still going through my notes. So I wanted to give you the action steps that you can take so you don't have to just go through your notes, okay? So why do we actually talk about the brain? And I think the reason being, as if you guys haven't figured out, there's one thing that brains don't run. Do you guys know what that is? Politics. Right? Like, there's no way that brains run politics. But other than politics, brains run everything. And if you think about it, brains run the stock market. Brains run our supermarkets. They run what it takes to get the food to our supermarkets, what we do as far as the foods that we eat, how we prepare it. Brains run big companies. They think differently. They create everything that you see around in the world. We start to look at the brains run families. They run, well, I take that back. There are some brains in there that keep those people out of trouble most of the time. We start looking at the brains run churches, like your pastor, the words that he's speaking, his brain is using that. And as you're in church, you're listening and your brain is using that. You are nothing except for your brain. Your brains run your families. They run the relationships that you have, the people that you're connected with. Every single thing in your existence you experience through your brain. And when we understand that, we realize that there's, how many different realities are there in this world? About 7 billion different realities. Nobody's had the same experience you have. Nobody that sees the world the same way you do. And there's a reason for it. And what we have to remember is that we're primal. We are literally cavemen in like jeans and a t-shirt, okay? Our brains are old brains living in a modern world. And so if we can learn what that means, I just want you to know that you will understand how brains run you. And that's what tonight's about. The things that you do, the smart things that you do, the stupid things that you do. Like, how many of us have ever made mistakes when we were younger? Right? Okay, maybe I'm the only one. I mean, I swear my dad at my wedding said, God gave you Melanie to save your life, right? But what you'll find out in a second is that my brain, I met her at 17. My brain didn't even fully develop until I was 28 years old. That's why he gave her to me. And you'll find out there's a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that is your executive decision. It's the part that keeps you out of trouble there. So I think one of the things is that most people never think about their brains, right? We never think about it until we get a little older and we have a little bit of brain fog. We're just not remembering phone numbers there. We don't think our kids have brain problems, but you'll find out that 50% of kids right now have like mental health issues, right? That's not, there's no such thing as a mental health issue. There's only brain issues, okay? And when we realize that the behavior and the way that we think is not that's not a diagnosis, it's not in the DSM, it's the way that your brain is functioning. And then what that does is that gives us power. We don't think that we're broken, right? We understand our body. And if you give your body what it needs, then it can actually do the things that it needs to do. So tonight, my whole goal is to teach you how to optimize your brain, to be able to understand what are the things that I can do, not just now, but for the rest of my life, that will take care of the one thing that determines the quality of my life, the character of my life, all of my experiences, all of my relationships, how I do at work, how I do at home, everything in our life, how we do in school, right? It's all based on our brain. And if we can optimize our brain, then we can have an optimized life. If we damage our brain, we're going to have a damaged life there. Okay, so big thing is that what's the motivating factor? I always start like, let's talk about the end in mind, right? What's our objective? So the first thing is, does anybody want to be healthier? Right? Because like if you spend any time here, your brain controls the function of your entire body, sends messages down your spinal cord, out the nerves to every single tissue, cell, and organ. So for your heart to beat or your lungs to breathe, for you to hear me or see me, I've probably said that 1,000 times or 10,000 times in here. So for us to be healthier, your brain has to work. If you're subluxated, that messages aren't going to get down. But if the brain's damaged, we're not going to get the same energy, because remember, healing is energy. And if our brain doesn't have the energy that it needs, it's not going to be able to heal the same way. If you want to, does anybody want to be wealthier, right? Right? Try having a broken brain and try to be successful in life, right? You know, like people that have brain damage, or learning disorders, or dementia or Alzheimer's, that's really expensive when your brain's not working right. So it's all about being successful in everything. And that's what today is about. So an unhealthy brain, when we start looking at it, obviously we find that people are sadder, they're sicker, they're poor, they're less successful. And you're going to have to make a decision what you want out of life. And that's what tonight's about. So our whole advantage, the things that will separate us from you have two people go to college, it's the same degree. Your competitive advantage, the thing that puts you over the edge, it's not your parents, it's not like your degree, it's your competitive advantage in life is going to be your brain and how it's actually functioning. So I took this picture right here. This is what's called a SPECT scan, and we're going to be talking about these a lot tonight, okay? A SPECT scan is a scan that they do of your brain, and what they're looking at is areas where there's blood flow. So when you have blood flow, that means you actually have nutrients and oxygen getting to that part of your brain, and that means that brain is working properly. So it should be nice and smooth and round and beautiful. That looks like that. So there's a guy that, I don't know if you guys ever watched the news. His name's Ruggs. He was a football player for the Raiders. And what he did is I watched him when he played at Alabama. Phenomenal player. He goes to the Raiders, their first round draft pick. He's killing it as a football player. And then he does something stupid. What he does is he gets into his car and he's driving like at 120 or 130 miles an hour down the strip in Las Vegas. He gets into a car accident, kills somebody. They go in there and they find he's got a gun in there. He's drunk. He's doing all these dumb things. And people always ask, why do they do those things, right? They have their whole life ahead of them. Why did they do something stupid where now he loses his $25 million a year contract? He's going to spend the next 10 years in jail, all for doing something stupid. So what I want you to see is this. This is Ruggs, and you're going to see, watch this down here. They're going to throw to him. He's going to catch it, and boom, right into his head. Do you see that? Here's another one. He comes in here, boom, right onto his head there. That's just a couple pictures. What I want you to think about is how many times do you think that's happened in his career, right? It's happened every single day, every single practice. And so when you look at Henry Ruggs, we wonder why he was driving at 156 miles an hour. It does not make any sense. But when we start looking at NFL player brains, do you see that part in the front where all the holes are? That's holes in their brain. That's areas where there's brain damage there. And you're going to find that that's the area which is like judgment, right? So they damage the area where you have judgment and like reasoning and learning and memory, so you can learn from your old mistakes and not make those same mistakes again. So you could tell him, don't do dumb things, but because his brain was damaged, he was just like surviving and reacting. And how many of us have ever had a car accident? How many of us have ever had a brain trauma or fallen down the stairs and we just don't think about it? Played soccer, and we'll talk about that in a second. So there's a couple things that I really want to hit on, because when you look at something, you have to, I always feel like you have to get the bigger understanding, like how magnificent your brain is there. And so the first thing is, if we can be in agreement, it's involved in everything you do. The way that we know this, we test this hypothesis, is if you take your brain out of your body, what works? So then nothing happens. Nothing you do works. So when your brain's in there, that it's involved in everything you do. So like we talked about how you think, feel, act, interact, your character, your like every decision you make. So just know that that's the importance of this class tonight. There should be 100, 200, 500 people in here, but they felt like it didn't apply to them. So when you start looking at all the things like that your brain's involved in, that is what we're talking about tonight. Some people are thinking, well, I just want to think better. Great. Your feelings, how do you feel about yourself, your successes, your failures, all these different things, how you react and how you act, those are all brain factors there. Number two is it's ridiculously complex. Like if you think about it, there's more neurons firing per second in your brain than there are stars in the known universe. Think about that. That's what's happening in your body, and you're not even thinking about it. It's that magnificent. And so we look at there's about like the per square inch, there's like 100 billion neurons per square inch in your brain. Think about that. Like that's like the smallest microcomputer. They estimate that you can actually store 600 years of the Wall Street Journal in your brain. Think about that. That amount of data can be stored in your memories in your brain and encoded there. And you don't even know how it happens, because you don't have to know how it happens, because your body's intelligent there. It's complex. They have 100 billion neurons, trillions of cells that are there. But what's really fascinating to me is that it's only about 2% of your body's weight, but it actually consumes about 20 to 30% of the energy of your entire body. So when you guys are eating, think about this. You're having lunch, and you have to you have to have your calories. Almost 1/3 of all the calories that you eat go to powering up this brain. That's how much energy that it takes. So you think artificial intelligence takes a lot of energy? Real intelligence takes way more energy there. So when we talk about eating, we're eating for our brain, we're breathing for our brain, we're exercising for our brain there. So next one, brain fact number 3. This is one of my favorite. You know, I always think that it's crazy that we think that now that kids can make decisions, but their brains don't, as a woman, doesn't even fully form until they're 25, and a man's brain doesn't even form until they're 28 years old. Think about that. And so what happens is your brain will start to mature from the back all the way to the front. And the last place that it'll actually will be in the prefrontal cortex there. So I think one of the things that when we damage our brain when we're young, when we're playing sports like football and soccer and having concussions when we're younger, it stops the brain from developing at that time. So I wrestled, I played football, I played soccer, I did all those things. And in spite of all those dumb things that I've done, it's taken a lot of work to be able to get to where I am. But what we do know is that if a child has a concussion, their risk of having Alzheimer's triples when they're older. Think about that. Just one concussion when they're younger. Think about a child that somebody's in a car accident. That one car accident could give a child a concussion. And many times we don't even know that we have a concussion, but it damages the brain there. So I think the main thing that we look at is, when do most of us start to take action? When we feel bad, right? We're like 40 years old, 50 years old, my brain doesn't work right. I'm done with this. I'm going to start eating right and exercising. But the problem is that if we think about what kids eat today, right? Think about what our children are eating when the brain's developing. So with the poor nutrition, the poor diet, the stresses that they're under, literally it's a form of brain damage that's occurring at the most important time of their life when their brain's developing there. So the thing that I really want you to understand is I made 2 of these. I actually made a brain in my kitchen the other day. And I'll let you can look at it. And I tried to make one that was supposed to feel like what a brain feels like. A brain's not hard like this. This is just what you see in the books there. A brain is incredibly soft. It's very pliant. It's very, very, very delicate. And so what happens is that when you look at your brain, if you think about it as like an egg yolk in your head, and there's in this inside, you'll see all these sharp ridges that are in there. So imagine you get a car accident and your head comes forward, an egg yolk flies forward there, hits against those sharp edges, and then comes and slams back there. That's what happens to our brain. So a car accident is not just a car accident. How many times has anybody ever like just been walking and trip over a curve and you fall down and you hit your face and you're like, oh, no big deal. The egg yolk came and slammed against all those hard ridges there. There's always brain damage there when that happens. And what do? Many times a lot of us will take now I have a headache, I'll take an acetaminophen or a Tylenol, and that actually inhibits the brain from repairing itself. Did you guys know that? There's something called acetylcholine, which is incredibly important for your brain to actually repair itself. And Tylenol and the acetaminophen actually prevents your brain from repairing itself. So that was the first thing when we started playing with the sharks, working with the sharks. They would just give these guys aspirin once they had their concussions. I'm like, no, stop. Like they couldn't figure out why sometimes these guys would have concussions for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, months. So I had one guy that had a concussion for a year that he was suffering with. Second thing that they found out was that you can't have a concussion without having a neck injury, and you can't have a neck injury many times without having a concussion. So the first thing that they do now is they get them adjusted, because they found out most of the brain stuff, if you're having bad information coming up, the bad signals go to the brain and the brain doesn't heal right. So if you ever know somebody that gets a concussion or a car accident, that's why it's so important to get adjusted right after that, so your brain starts healing and your body starts healing right there. So I think the main thing is that you just have to think about all the different ways that people harm themselves. And we don't really think about these things. I see a lot of cheerleaders here. They fall, they get dropped on their head. Lacrosse, horse racing, water polo. Like in water polo, I see that's one of the main ones I see. Kids get the balls thrown at their head. I have one lady that's a teacher. She works on the playground and she gets bounced in the head all the time by the balls. I mean, it's probably happened to you, right? So I think about like basketball and hockey and all these different sports. Literally, our brain, it's amazing that our brain isn't damaged. So this is one of those SPECT scans that we talked about. This is a 15-year-old kid that's a soccer player. And they're not going to college on a scholarship. But look what's already happening to their brain. You see these holes already starting to form in a 15-year-old. That's the first part of their brain. They're having troubles making good decisions. They kind of get into trouble a lot. They can't figure out what's going on. It's those repeated concussions that child's having, and they're going to have to pay the price when they're our age if their parents didn't know. What if they weren't giving them omega-3s? What if they were giving them an inflammatory diet and letting them eat a lot of sugar? You drink a lot of Gatorade after that, give them Tylenol after that. And that's where the problems come. So I want to not scare you. I want to empower you so you know that there's solutions, that you guys are in charge, because it's your brain, it's nobody else's brain there. By the way, this is a player that was in the NFL. And he thought he never had a concussion. He'd never had a documented concussion. And look at his brain. It looks like Swiss cheese, right? So this is a major factor that, like, did anybody ever see the movie Concussion with Will Smith? It was a great movie. If you ever get a chance, watch it, but you can see the damage that it causes. Here's a car accident. Anybody ever had a car accident before there? That's just a simple car accident. And the lady, after the car accident, she's like, I just don't feel right. I'm depressed. I can't really think well. I can't remember well. And they said, oh, it's all in your head. You're making that up. And so we're like, okay, let's see what's in her head. And this was her SPECT scan there, right? She literally had holes in her brain where her head hit the steering wheel. She was looking to the left. Her head hit the steering wheel like that. So is it permanent? No, you can repair a brain, but you just have to know the strategies and the plans there. Our soldiers, think about this. Our soldiers over there with all those blast injuries that they've had. We think, oh, you're tough, you come back, and they can't figure out why the first thing that they do is they put them on antidepressants, or they put them on Tylenol and painkillers and all these different things. And I'll show you some of the SPECT scans later of what happens when we take drugs, and what it actually does to the brain. People are like, oh, it's just marijuana. No, it's not just marijuana. Marijuana damages the brain. It's just, the painkiller, opioids damage the brain, and we'll be able to see that later there. So this is when I talk about when your brain's working right, your life works right. This is, and I'll go over this one later on. When your brain's not working right, there is nothing right in your brain. So the main thing I want you to understand is there's different parts of your brain that are controlling different behaviors. And that's where we're going to spend a lot of time tonight. And you'll see there's about 5 areas. We're going to look at the prefrontal cortex, which is here, right? And then we're going to look at your parietal lobes, like right in here. Your temporal lobes, your parietal lobes, occipital lobes, cerebellum. Each of those are really cool names, but I want you to understand what their role is. And what I do want you to understand is your body, the brain actually develops from back to front, okay? So the first thing, what does a baby need to be able to do? It needs to be able to see something. So the occipital lobe forms first, and that's where it myelinates, and we'll talk about that in a second. Then they need to be able to move, so the cerebellum starts to move. And it's amazing that God put your bodies together in such an amazing way that when you need it, then you have it, right? And so normal's a myth. That's my next one. And I just want you to understand, and my wife always says normal's a setting on a hair dryer, like on your washing machine. And I'm like, I don't even know how to work that. So that wasn't a good example. We were talking about it. She's like, yeah, just say normal's a setting on the dryer. But I think that one of the things is that we have to realize what is normal anymore. We've actually gotten used to what we call common, right? It's common for somebody to be depressed. It's common for somebody to have anxiety. It's common for somebody to have ADD. It's common for somebody to have, a lot of these issues, but it's not normal. And I think if we can come to that understanding, so what we find is that if you're having anxiety, if you're having struggles with depression and all these different things, there is actually a reason for it. It's not something that you're just experiencing. It's actually coming from your brain, and there's strategies that we can use to deal with that there. Change your brain, change your life, and that's the best thing, right? If you cut yourself, your body's designed to heal, right? So everything on your body can heal as long as you stop damaging it. So if I use the analogy all the time, if you have your thumb and you're hammering a nail and you hit your nail with a hammer, if you hit your nail with a hammer, it's going to turn purple. Jen, will you turn on the air conditioning? But if you hit the hammer every single day, it's not going to heal. Does that make sense? So when's it going to heal? When you stop hitting it, right? It's not that it has a problem, it's a healing problem. Oh, that's the way I'm going to have to live for the rest of my life. Let's just make sure that we stop hitting it. And that's what tonight's about. So you're not stuck. And that's what I want to make sure that we go into. Okay, so why is this Thrive by 25? And why did you'll see there's a lot of adults here, but I wanted to have just those adults have kids in their life. Those adults have grandkids in their life. Those adults know other children. But the same principles that allow a child to have a completely fulfilled life are the same principles that will need to allow you to have a completely fulfilled life there. So I think the main thing is that when they did surveys, 1 in 4 people had brain struggles every year. And I think that it goes up as we get older, right? That's the number one thing people talk to me about as they get older. They're having some brain struggles, memory issues, brain fog. I just can't. I'm just kind of, my brain's overwhelmed. My brain has no energy. I just can't think anymore. But what's important now, studies show that 75% of all mental health issues start before 25. And that's why we want to start our kids right so that we don't have to have damaged adults as we move forward there. What's interesting though is that we think, well, it's just, tough it out, be tough. Yeah, you can do that. We can give strategies on there. But when kids have their issues there, about 50% of those kids drop out of school, right? And it's maybe not just drop out of high school, but maybe drop out of college or drop out of relationships or drop out of, whatever job that they have. Have you ever known somebody that they just can't stay in a job and you're like, just kind of step up and do it? Well, maybe they don't have the mental ability to do that so that they can actually deal with that. And so that's what we're going to really focus on tonight is what that is, the mental ability. And I don't want to go to too many stats, but I think one of the things that really disturbs me is suicide. Suicide is one of those things that's very preventable, right? And it's when that person loses hope. They feel like there is no hope, nothing can change. And your brain is how you think, how you feel is a result of the environment that you find yourself in every day. But how the environment in your brain is more important than the environment that you surround yourself with. So if your brain's inflamed, if your brain is deficient, if your brain's not working right, you're going to perceive the world. Have you ever known somebody that has everything in the world and they're super depressed? Right? They have no stresses in the world and they're depressed. It's because their brain's not working. They can't perceive that in a particular way there. So this is really important. So brain development, there's very low activity in your brain at birth. Okay, you're just, you see the kids, they just kind of like look at you. But what ends up happening is it increases until you're about 8 years old. So there's this massive amount of brain growth in the first few years. It decreases until you're 28, becomes stable. And then there's something called pruning and myelination there. So what pruning is that you only get to keep what you use. So you have about 500 billion billion neurons, they estimate, in the infant's brain. Within the first year, they lose about 150 or 100 billion neurons, somewhere in that neighborhood. Think about that. So let's say a child is born into an environment where everybody's yelling and screaming and like there's fighting going on. So those neurons that are being stimulated will stay, and those ones for rest, relaxation, happiness, joy, creativity, and they're not being stimulated, well, your brain's not going to use them, so it's going to prune those ones. Think about that. By the time you get to about 8 years old, another 100 billion neurons are pruned off there. So that's why when a child's younger, if you expose them to languages, those neurons stay. If the child's just sitting on their iPad all day long every day and they're watching, what is that, Baby Shark, right? And they're babysitting, those neurons are going to stay, but the ones of learning how to read and write and communicate, and look what happened to our COVID kids, right? They actually had to completely change the standards for all the children in school that were those young kids, because those neurons for communicating and connecting and learning were actually pruned off because they didn't use them. All the ones that they had that stayed were fear and anxiety and protection and depression, and they lost the ability to connect. They've actually found that a lot of these kids that grew up in COVID, I saw these children that never even left the house, and then finally after COVID they came out, and they don't know how to interact with people. They don't know how to be with people. I have grandparents that told me that my grandkids don't run to me because they don't know me, but they do now, but they still don't want to be touched by anybody else besides their parents because of the pruning. So fact 2 is that you have this thing called myelination. And this is where I think that God did a great job with us. Because what ends up happening is myelination is this process that actually covers and makes the nerves fire faster. And so one of the studies I found is it makes your nerves fire 10 to 100 times faster. It's like the insulation or the on a copper wire that makes everything fire there. So it starts at birth and then it continues into adulthood until you're 28 years old. How cool is that? So if you damage that, maybe the child doesn't have that's why you always give kids omega-3s, right? Because the omega-3s make up the myelination. But if a child's eating a whole bunch of potato chips and French fries, there's not enough the healthy fats to actually myelinate the nerves. And so those nerves never get to fire as quickly as they possibly can. So watch this. So it starts at the back. Cerebellum is the first right here. It's going to be coordination. Then you're going to see the occipital lobes, which are going to be for the child to be able to vision. So the coordination is for the child to be able to move. And then what happens is they start to get maturity. That's what we call the prefrontal cortex. You're like, that child is so mature. It's because their prefrontal cortex is developed. That 35-year-old male is not mature at all. Like, oh, he's so immature, right? It's not that he's immature, it's just that his prefrontal cortex is not developed there, or it's been damaged there. And so how do we damage it? Quick and easy: drug abuse, alcohol, stress, emotional trauma, physical trauma. All those things that happen in childhood will definitely delay development. And so that's what our job is to protect our kids. We protect our minds, we protect their environment, we protect their developing brain, because everything that goes into the brain is making an impact there. And that's one of the things that when you look at the teenage brain, have you ever wondered why like all these kids are like drama llamas and like high school? Like I couldn't understand when my daughter was in high school where everything became this big drama thing. She said this to me and then this happened there. And I'm like, what? It wasn't a big deal, right? Well, what I want you to see is that the emotional brain and the limbic system, it's in full swing. There's nothing to slow it down. Like that hasn't, like, it's like there's no prefrontal cortex to be able to give you like this perspective and to make good decisions and like to be able to have to be able to respond appropriately there. So everything's about drama to a teenager because that part of the brain hasn't fully developed there. So instead of getting angry at your kids, being like, hey, knock it off, you're like, hey, I understand that you're not fully developed. And so, of course, that part of the brain is going to be like, it's going to be hot, right? And so that's what is supposed to happen there. And so then what we do is we yell at them and we scream at them like, mature, come on, step it up, forget about it. All that's doing is just causing more stress and stressing their brain out there. Think about that. We have a role as a parent there. And that's one of the things that's important is that their emotions are running wild. They don't understand like the whole emotional aspect there, but it's the problem is the lack of the prefrontal cortex. Now the other thing that is I think it's important is that you have this thing that is called the basal ganglia, and it's the part of your brain that makes you think that everybody's thinking about you, right? Does anybody recognize that as like in the teenage years? You think everybody's thinking about you, and I call it the 13-40-60 rule. So at 13 years old, you think everybody's thinking about you, right? At 40 years old, you don't care what people think about you. And at about 60 years old, you realize that nobody was even thinking about you in the first place because they were just thinking about themselves, right? Like they were so caught up in themselves, but we wasted 60 years thinking that everybody was thinking about us. But that's one of the biggest challenges is you have this basal ganglia that says, everybody's thinking about you, and you think everybody's doing that. And then the second thing is you have this limbic system that it's this emotional part of your brain that makes you crave and want to have relationships, right? So isn't that frustrating as a parent? You're like, all of a sudden they got into high school and they want to spend more time with their families, right? It's all about peer acceptance there. It's that connection, that peer acceptance there. But that's why also drug programs fail for kids. Because kids just don't do drugs because they want to do drugs. They do drugs because they want to fit in. Nobody's like, oh, I think I want to try drugs. No, it's about fitting in, to be connected, and to be able to, because they want everybody to stop thinking. They think everybody's thinking about them. Okay, so like I said, it starts the prefrontal cortex. The first part of your brain starts developing somewhere ends about 28 in males. But I want you to read this. Think about this. Time management, forethought, impulse control, procrastination, goal planning, learning from your mistakes. Doesn't that sound like a typical teenager, right? That's having some challenges. You're like, why did you do that? That was so stupid. Why did you do that thing? Why didn't you do your homework? Why does your backpack look like a mess, right? It's because that prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed. And so in the handouts, I have a lot of strategies of things that we can do to be able to support that there. Multitasking. This is the worst thing that you can do for your brain. Your brain was never designed to multitask. So think about this. A kid's watching Netflix while they're doing their homework, while they're texting with their friend, right? And they can't figure out why they're not doing well in school, okay? It's because our brains aren't designed to multitask. In fact, it actually burns out the neurons in the brain. It's too much information for the brain. Our brain is very linear. It can take in one information at one time. So trying to, like my daughter's working as a lawyer now, and she'll be working on some sort of document. I don't know what they do, but and then she'll be FaceTiming us, and I'm like, do your job and then FaceTime us, right? And she can't figure out why she's stressed because she's overloading her brain. The more things that you do, it's like if you ever seen those the things you plug in all the electrical strip. And then the more you plug into it, eventually it flips the breaker and then it stops working. And that's what happens the more things that you're doing to your brain while you're using it there. What they actually find out when they do MRI studies on people that have that multitask a lot, the gray matter, the part of your brain actually shrinks because the multitasking actually destroys neurons. So keep the main thing, focus on that one thing there. And I think that that's where this whole social media thing is really destroying our brain. And what they actually, I wrote an article, it was on the chair for a while. They actually called it like digital autism, where you lose the ability to connect with other people, the ability to focus on one thing, the ability to regulate your emotions, because it literally destroys that prefrontal cortex of your brain there. They find that kids are like lose self-control, they don't have to regulate there. So I think it's probably, if you ask me, after seeing kids, and like, I mean, I've had thousands of kids as patients over the years, and I call them all my kids because I feel like I raised them, like you guys. But I've seen a massive change in like what has happened to them with social media there. All right, so here's where the problem is that the multitasking also destroys our attention span. So do you remember like when YouTube first came out, you'd watch an hour video, and then like you're like, well, I can only watch a 15-minute video. Now we got reels and we got, you know, all these different things. Like if it's more than like 60 seconds, nobody's watching it. And we really like those ones that we like that they're 30 seconds or less, right? So what we find is that Microsoft did a study and they looked at what's the average attention span of a goldfish. They found out it was about 9 seconds. Currently, the average attention span of a human being when they study them is about 8 seconds, right? So I noticed that when I would do consultations with people, and I used to be able to have consultation, and now like after 8 seconds, they're like drifting off. I'm like, I'm having to move and get their attention. I'm like, right here, I'm over here. Come on, look at me. All right. Creativity is brain function. And so this is a big one that I want you to understand there. Have you ever heard of like the crazy like artist, right? Like the crazy guy, the guy Monet, who is it that cut off his ear? Van Gogh, right? Why would somebody cut off their ear? That makes no sense. Like, why are they always have the kind of they're always getting in trouble. Like the artists, they're kind of like, they can't function in society, because what they've actually find is that the lower your prefrontal cortex is, the more creative you are. But the more rigid your prefrontal cortex is, the less creative you are. And so it's okay to be creative. It's all about balance. But when we get dominant in an area there. So, all right, last thing. This is what I call the brain robbers. And you guys will have this. I put all the brain robbers in your packets, so you don't have to write them down. But just know that everything that you do, how many of these things would you guys identify as things that you do on a regular basis? Let's see, maybe a little excess TV, excess video games, excess text messaging. Well, that's a start. That's like teenagers, right? Then we have just negative thinking, not challenging yourself, like oh, I can't do that anymore. I'm too old, right? They have all these things that we say to ourselves. These things are what are things that damage our brain. So you have to, I should have called it the brain damage list rather than the brain robbers list there. But if you can damage it, you can repair it, because your body was designed to heal. So look, just getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep. Oh, I don't sleep. I don't need sleep. Well, the problem is that's when your brain repairs itself. Your brain it gets damaged by being alive. And then at night when you go to sleep is when your brain repairs itself. Just on a side note, there's something called the glymphatic system, and that is the thing that repairs it. But when we're stuck into this position, we don't have a neck curve there. That glymphatic system doesn't work very well. That's one of the reasons why we give you rolls, so that you can put your neck into that position, so you have a nice neck curve while you're sleeping, so your brain can clean and repair itself there. That's why it's so devastating when somebody's walking around like this, and they have that loss of curve, because now not only can you not get nutrients and oxygen to the brain, but you can't clean out your brain, and the only time that it cleans is at night. So just, if you can't figure out your rolls, what to do, let me know. I'll show you. You put them behind your neck and go to sleep. All right. So healthy brain concussion. We're going to run through some pictures here. Just want you to see that. Here's a healthy brain, and here's drug abuse. Okay. So you're like, that person that's abusing drugs, they're no good. They're rotten. They're a bad person. I want you to think, they literally have a damaged brain. Like if you thought, you didn't know that said drug abuse, and you looked at that and you said, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for that person. That must be horrible to have a brain like that. Yet we judge these people because they have damaged brains. And so I'm just asking, and I have some history of drug abuse in my family, and to be a little bit more compassionate, but also knowing that just stop it sometimes doesn't work right because they don't have the prefrontal cortex. They don't have the good decision-making areas. They have the areas that suppress that prevent people from becoming violent. Guess what? When you drink alcohol, it suppresses the prefrontal cortex. You don't make good decisions, and then the violent areas can actually expand there. How about this one? One of the things that people ask me all the time is like, well, I'm like, okay, what's one thing we can do? How about if you drink water? I don't like water. And I'm like, what do you like? I like coffee. I'm like, okay. I like soda. Well, those things are diuretics. Does that make sense? They literally suck water from your body. Look at what a hydrated brain looks like and a dehydrated brain looks like. Literally, if you're dehydrated, over time it'll put holes into your brain. So just drink half your body weight in ounces. How simple is that? You don't have to buy it. Actually, you do have to buy it now. It's actually more expensive than like supplements, right? But you can get a filter and drink as much water as you can because your brain needs it. It's made up of water and it's floating in water there. How about this one? See this one right here? This is a brain scan that they did, and they had somebody like thinking positive thoughts. Same person, by the way. They literally had somebody thinking positive thoughts and like visualizing a compelling future. And then what they did is they had them do the opposite. They had them focus on negative, like the things that they're most afraid of. And this wasn't like 6 months later. This was right now. Like they tested them and then retested them there. And they literally were damaging in their brain having those negative thoughts. How many of us have these automatic negative thoughts running through our brain? Like if you don't raise your hand, you're lying, right? Like okay, we're safe room. I'm just going to assume everybody raised their hand there. If not, you're not human. We all have them. They're like, I'm not good enough. This person always does this thing to me. I'm going to live in a van down by the river when I get older, right? Like we're all thinking about that. But the thing, what's that? Yes. So I think the main thing is we have to be very careful about not only the people that you expose yourself to, but the thoughts that you expose yourself to because it's damaging. So let's go to prefrontal cortex. One of my favorite areas there. Here's the healthy prefrontal cortex, nice and smooth. That's a damaged one. Okay, so we'll just skip through that. But what I want you to think about, your prefrontal cortex is like Pinocchio. Who's it? Jiminy Cricket, right? Remember Jiminy Cricket? Pinocchio was doing fine until he got rid of Jiminy Cricket and he almost died, right? Like that was his biggest challenge there. So one of the things that, that Jiminy Cricket kept him having impulse, like don't do this, do the right things. So these are some of the things that you'll see when your prefrontal cortex is working. But I always say that the best way to understand your prefrontal cortex, I heard a comedian one time say that the best safety device on a car was the rearview mirror with red lights in it, right? Because who speeds when there's red lights in your rearview mirror? Who doesn't lane change? You do all the right things. So that's what your prefrontal cortex is the red lights in the mirror there. Here's the problem. When we talked about this earlier, but when your prefrontal cortex isn't working right, those are some of the things that you're going to experience: procrastination, disorganization. And so if you start to see those things happening in your life, I want you, as we're going through these, I'm not going to go over each thing, but I want you to start thinking, is this me, right? Because we all have areas that we can strengthen or weaken, and you don't have to be like a complete mess in a particular area, but I want you to start thinking about, is this me? Is this an area that I want to work on? Prefrontal cortex, and my sister sent me this, by the way, because I think I had a prefrontal cortex issue growing up. But I always like to scare her. And I love this one. He's like working on a missile. Nobody in their right mind would like pop a bag with the guy that's working on the missile there. A lot of confrontation. This one says, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Yes, I do. And he says, you could lose a few pounds. Like that person that has no filter, right? You're like, did they really say that? Like, yeah, that's the person with a prefrontal cortex issue. You're like, I can't believe that person said that. So when it's low, what we start to, a lot of these things, these are the experiences. Like somebody will get a label like ADD, ADHD, and that's why they give them medication to increase the dopamine to stimulate that prefrontal cortex. They just don't have this, like, they don't have that get up and go, that come on, you can do it. And the teachers are always like, you can do this. I believe in you. You have so much potential. And the kid can't turn in his homework, right? That's a prefrontal cortex issue there. So I love this, and I put this. This is a really interesting article. I want you to just kind of read this for me. It basically says, this suggests that the mechanisms when people get adjusted improves the performance of their prefrontal cortex. And I've seen this in time, like so many times. Have you ever, like, that's why I tell kids, like, get adjusted before your exams. Like, I would always adjust my kids on the way out of the house before they had finals, just so we could stimulate the cerebellum, which would stimulate the prefrontal cortex, and they would be able to be at their very best there. So, like I said, it's about 25 to 28. We got to make sure that that we take care of that prefrontal cortex. Cerebellum, by the way, is the bottom part, and you'll find that when the cerebellum's working right, it stimulates the prefrontal cortex to work. So think about what's happening when you're wobbling, right? You're stimulating your cerebellum. A few years ago, I actually bought a whole school wobble disc for the entire school. And because they were low performing, there was a low performing school, so we put wobble discs and all there, and we put together a wobble program, and the kids actually started getting better grades and being able to focus in class, because their cerebellum was being stimulated, but it actually helped regulate and stimulate that prefrontal cortex. They got better grades. Guess what happens when you're subluxated? That part of your spine's not moving, so your cerebellum's going to become imbalanced, and it's gonna have an impact on the prefrontal cortex. That's why we're having like our back to school for our kids, which we check kids in the families that aren't under care, we adjust them, start the school year off right to make sure that they're doing well. But the prefrontal cortex, it's your balance, your coordination. So like, oh, that's just a clumsy kid, right? There's no clumsy kids. There's kids with cerebellar issues. Okay. Oh, he always bumps into things. No, they have a cerebellar issue. Stop writing those things off as just the way that they are. Everything means something to me. It's about coordinating our thoughts and balancing that. So you'll start to see that kid will have slowed speaking, slowed speech, slowed everything. Their bodies, like their life is in slow motion. They're kind of disorganized. That would be your cerebellum issue. Obviously, when you adjust somebody, everything, because we're adjusting the nervous system. This is a great article. It basically talked about patients with chronic low back pain. It literally shut down their cerebellum. Think about that. It shut down their cerebellum and actually deadened it. And so they found that the people were much more likely to actually become drug addicts, because they were given painkillers, and they were trying to look at like people that got painkillers that were under chiropractic care and people that got painkillers that weren't under chiropractic care. And they found that there was 51% greater likelihood, if you weren't receiving chiropractic adjustments with low back pain, that you would actually become an addict to that. And there's actually something called I forget what the name of the research of the rehab place is, and they have like a 90% success rate, because they actually adjust the people all the way through their rehab program, because it actually stimulates their brain, so their brain can actually heal and function there. Okay, how about this? Here's autism. What I want you guys to see and on this is, do you see how it's white here? That's the top 8% of firing. So the whiter something is, the more it's firing. The red is probably the top 20%. And then you have the blue, which is kind of like the normal area there. You're going to see typically in autism, the cerebellum is going to be very weak. That's why our kids that are on the spectrum respond incredibly well to being adjusted, because what that allows to do is the adjustment stimulates the cerebellum, which helps to balance out the brain there. But think about all these kids that, when I talked about digital autism the other day, the article I wrote, they're not moving. They're stuck in this position, and we're seeing more and more kids with tremendous amounts of pressure right at the base of the skull, where the cerebellum is there. Here's like the typical autistic brain. You'll see the whole back half doesn't have there's very little brain activity there. That's because it's just not being stimulated. That's why they'll move a lot and try to do certain things with their body, because those stimming motions stimulate the cerebellum, because their brain needs that to be able to calm them down. If you take an autistic person and you don't let them move there, they're not going to like it very much. They need to be able to move to be able to calm their brain down. So things we can do to help our cerebellum. By the way, Look what happens when we're in a grateful. It activates the cerebellum. When we're in fear, it inhibits the cerebellum. Remember, like when you're in fear and you're running from a tiger, you don't want to have logical thought. You just want to do whatever you can do. Your body has all these fail-safe mechanisms. Best exercise that you can do for your cerebellum, table tennis. Literally, because you're having to move, you're having to watch, you're having to balance. It's hand-eye coordination there. So if somebody has cerebellar issues, best exercise, but you can do. But gratitude, if you have a cerebellar or a balance issue. Let me get back to that and I'll stay around afterwards because I want to make sure I get through this. One thing I want to talk to you guys is about brain reserve. So one of the things about brain reserve, which is fascinating, is that you have 100% brain, but your body has about a 20% reserve. And that's in times of trouble. It's like we have our emergency fund at home, like just in case something happens. But what if you're always using your emergency fund? And then a true emergency comes, and then you have nothing, right? And so what we're doing is we're using many times, we're pushing ourselves beyond our mental capacity to get through the day. That's why we're using Rockstars and Red Bulls and caffeine and all these different types of stimulants and whatever we can do to get through the day. We're using our reserves rather than saying, oh, my brain's tight, I need to take time. And so that's why over time, you start to see the brain starts to break down because those neurons break down there. So this is a really signs I put together of warning signs that your brain's in trouble. And you'll start to see the typical ones. You want to have less conversations with people, shorter attention span, like even things like your brain regulates your blood pressure. So we start to find people that have high blood pressure. The high blood pressure damages the brain there. But also they can't inhibit their stress response. Weight issues are regulated by the brain. So if you identify with any of these things, like any of them, like, hey, look, let's address that. Let's not just pretend that it doesn't exist, or I'm doing okay because I don't feel something right now. Eventually we will. The goal is to keep the brain reserve high over time there and over age. Okay, so let's talk about like I was saying, we have the most active parts of the brain here. This right here, when you see something like this compared to this would be overactivity. Do you see that? Like that's just not a normal look there. So there's something called the anterior cingulate gyrus. That's an important part of the brain because I call it your gear shifter. Like, do you think about that's like where somebody gets so stuck and so fixated on something, like you're trying to, they just want to argue about something. I remember I was arguing with somebody and they said, well, I'm going out to the South Coast. I'm like, South Coast, what's that? Well, the coast on the south. I'm like, no, that's the East Coast. And they're like, oh, no, it's on the south. And I'm like, no, it's not called the South Coast. And they were so stuck in that place that like they wanted to be argumentative about something as silly as that. And they continued on with it all day. No, it's the South Coast. I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. But whatever you want to do, I didn't care. It's up to you, right? But what you'll find, watch what happens with this particular person. So the anterior cingulate gyrus is that person that is looking for, when it's hot, right? Its job is to look for errors. Have you ever noticed somebody that sees a problem in everybody and every single thing right there? They get stuck and fixated and obsessive about something there. They can't go from idea to idea. They just, all they want to do is just talk about this one thing. A lot of times people like that are like they're talking about their health or their mother-in-law or whatever it is, right? So they can't just go with the flow. So this is what the job of the anterior cingulate gyrus is. So like I said, it gets stuck. Then we get into this worried, rigid, and flexible, like that something happened to them 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and they're still holding a grudge about it, and you completely forgot about it. Do you remember that time so long ago? They find that they just want to argue all the time. So kids, when they're younger, they have a tendency to not have that anterior cingulate gyrus functioning all right. So what they'll have a tendency to be oppositional, right? Now, oh no, like they want to fight about everything. You're like, no, just know that their brain's not developed. Once they get to 28, it won't be oppositional there. But I love this picture, and I want you to see this. This is a husband that had an underactive anterior cingulate gyrus, and this is a wife that had an overactive anterior cingulate gyrus. How do you think that went? Wow. Right? The husband's like, hey, let's go with the flow. It's all cool, no big deal. And the wife's like, you always put your, you never do this and you never do that, you never do that. And like he felt henpecked, right? And she was just like doing her thing. So she's like vacuuming all the time. She's like making us take his shoes off there. She was like, like addicted to food. And he's like just doesn't even say anything anymore. Like, but it's because his anterior cingulate gyrus, he's just like going through that. He just like sat on the couch, right? How many times have you heard about that? Like, it sounds like the common thing there. But just know that if you know that in a relationship and somebody's oppositional, you know that there's what I call the power of no. And the problem is that anterior cingulate gyrus is going to develop before the prefrontal cortex there. So that's why I always say it's the don't tell me what to do, right? That's the teenager thing, right? Don't tell me what to do. Problem is also, just by the way, there is some genetics that they find in the anterior cingulate gyrus. So it does run in families that some people can have higher ones. It doesn't mean that's your DNA is your destiny, but you also know that you can like do things about it too. So this is what we call the automatic no. Like if you have if somebody with an anterior cingulate gyrus, they're always no. They're always like anything you say, they do the opposite, right? This was kind of an interesting one. This was a wife that I saw in a study. She actually had PMS so bad that she stabbed her husband 3 times, right? So they wanted to put her into jail. She tried to murder him. And so they did a scan on her. Look at her anterior cingulate gyrus on day 26 of her cycle, and look at her anterior cingulate gyrus on day 7 of her cycle, right? It just lit up there. Like literally the hormones you'll find are a massive impact on how our brain works. So yeah, PMS is a real thing. It heightens particular parts of your brain to protect the survival of our species. But remember, we're primitive people living in a modern world, so we have to know these things. How about alcohol? This was a picture of a girl that she was 16 years old, always fighting, always running away from home, and she was drinking all the time. When people drink, they drink to calm down that anterior cingulate gyrus, that oppositional, the high anxiety, that feeling stuck place. This was and she was actually drinking not because she did it to oppose her parents. So when you're finding somebody's doing something to oppose you purposely, you know that they're probably hot in there. So don't worry about it. In your packets, there's all the things that I would suggest and recommend to do. There's too much information to cover to be able to go over all of that. But I just want you to know that this was a guy that had a hot cingulate gyrus also. He smoked marijuana every single day because it calmed him down so he could function and have good relationships there. Okay, last part that we're going to talk about, your basal ganglia. This is your anxiety center. And this is one of the things that I've seen that has been really fired up with a lot of people. And there's, this is a massive one. There's actually no such thing as anxiety. It's a perceived thing, right? Your brain is perceiving things as a threat there. So what we look at is that when the basal ganglia is up, you'll start to see that people always predicting the worst out of things. So, oh yeah, I'm going to walk out there and I'm going to get mugged, right? You'll find that person, you'll see people that have a tendency to bite their nails and to pick at things and to always be touching things like that. They get stuck. People that have problems speaking in public, their anxiety is so high about that. The opposite, obviously, when it's really low, is they're going to have the ADD symptoms. They're just going to have you'll see them have movement disorders there. They'll do things with a twist and grab onto their hair or just to be able to do things. Basal ganglia is really kind of an interesting thing because it is helping you understand what we call consequences of your actions. So when the basal ganglia is not right, you do things, but you don't think about the consequences of your actions there. And so people that they do risky behavior, they get into trouble all the time. But because if your basal ganglia was right, you'd have enough anxiety not to do stupid things. Does that make sense? But when it's low, you have no anxiety. You're like, hey, let's go jump out of an airplane and I'll grab the parachute on the way down. There has to be some anxiety about jumping out of an airplane, right? So the problem with kids is that the basal ganglia, like I said, is super active. So it makes them anxious because they want to fit in. And it makes you really worried about what others are thinking about you. It makes you internally focused there. You do all of your things to impress other people when that basal ganglia is not working right. And so that's where we like the social media is like ridiculous because you're snapping and you're putting pictures on there to impress people there, and all it does is it feeds into the brain there. Um, so here's the big thing: basal ganglia. Just know you'll start to see too high panic, anxiety, somatoform, meaning that you'll start to feel pains in different areas, and you'll think that you have pain, but you'll like everything hurts. You're always thinking that you're having like a heart attack or a digestive problem. Is it a tumor? Like I always had one lady that every time something happened, she's like, "Do you think it's a tumor?" And I'm like, "No, not since Wednesday." Okay, you didn't grow a tumor since Wednesday there. Boo syndrome. You know what Boo syndrome is? Like you ever walk behind somebody like boo, like they're the people that are always startling there. That's Boo syndrome right there. Those are people that have that basal ganglia that's too high. Best thing is belly breathing, like just deep diaphragmatic breaths. You guys, if you ever ask for our box breathing handout, that's incredibly good for for the basal ganglia people. Other one is hand warming, this is there's a handout in there, but I'll just kind of tell you about it. What you do is you imagine like your hands warm, like you just close your eyes, visualize your hands warm, or you can like, and they'll have pictures. You can look at different pictures like puppies and sunsets, and like when you see something that makes your hands warm, it means that it calms down that basal ganglia there. So there's an activity that I put in there. Hypnosis is a big one because what it does is it gets beyond the basal ganglia. That will really help people out there. This is meditation. This is somebody before meditation, and this is somebody after meditation. Look, just meditating and slowing down to the speed of life. There's a great app that I just found. It's called NewCalm. I actually just downloaded it 2 days ago, but Dr. Dawson and I were in Chicago last weekend, and we had one of the people speaking on it and went into all the science behind it. And so I went home and I've been using it for the last 24 hours. They have like a free trial. It's like 14 days, but they have different areas. Like if you have problems with meditating, then you can actually use this to actually work. It does the same type of thing, but more concentrated. So it's a really quick and easy way to meditate if you don't know how to meditate. Last thing is our deep limbic system. This is our emotional tone. Like our limbic system is what like helps us feel love, helps us feel connected. And that's, think about this. We have this huge thing as a teenager where we want to feel like everybody's thinking about us, right? But we also want to feel connected to all of our friends. And so the challenge is that when it's not working right, they're sad and moody. There's not a lot of motivation. We feel social isolation. So there's nothing more painful for a human being than to be isolated, to be kicked out of the group, not be part of the tribe, right? Think about high school. Like if you nobody wanted to be on the outside of the circle walking along. Everybody wanted to be on the inside, and that's why it's so painful to not be part of the crew for a kid there. So when we think about it, they're overly emotional. They have the prefrontal cortex that can't keep that in check to be able to make a good decision about it. And the worst thing is like when they're around their peers, if their peers criticize them, they make them feel like something less. They actually did a study where they looked at a mother or a father criticizing their child, or a peer criticizing. It was actually worse when a parent criticized their child. It literally that damaged their limbic system because it was they don't have that filter, and it left imprints. And so remember, those stresses create damage to that part of the brain. So be very careful of the words that we use, because words have power there. So if it's too high, we start to get depression, all these mood changes, and that's what we're seeing right now with our kids, right? We see all kinds of depression and mood changes and pain and sensory overload, and they can't everybody's walking around with headphones on right now. There's not that connection there. When it's too low, they're going to be reactive. So you have that kid that reacts there. So limbic bonding, they actually found that one of the easiest things, I'm not saying go buy your kids a puppy, right? But pet therapy is a really big thing because it actually protects that. Depression is really a low part of that limbic system there. But what I want you to see is this right here is drugs. This is the reason why we don't do drugs. If I was to tell a kid anything like drugs put holes in your brain, but you don't feel it. So look at this one. This is a healthy brain. This is cocaine. Think about that. Somebody does cocaine or methamphetamines. Why do people on meth steal from people? Because they have brain damage. Okay, like when you start looking at alcohol and heroin, like alcohol is a drug. Okay, it damages our brain. There's nothing that is good that comes from alcohol except a hangover, right? And that's not even good. Look at marijuana. Marijuana. This is a 16-year-old with a 2-year daily history of abusing marijuana there. So, but you can get it in the store. It's legal, right? It damages our brain. And that's what we have to think about. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's good for us. There's a lot of things that are legal now that are not good for us there. So let me move to this way. Okay. So this is a lot of times we find that people, though, their brains are hot and they're self-medicating, and that's really what I wanted to give you these tools for, because as you go back through the notes that are there and you'll be like, hey, this is an area that I'm feeling like this is for me. Let me try some of these exercises that I can do so I can strengthen my brain there, or the things that I need to avoid to be able to strengthen my brain. If we're having challenges, here's some supplements that maybe I can take and try them on a short-term basis, let's say for like 90 days, and see like how my life changes there. So this was and so I think the biggest thing is that a lot of times people are self-medicating, whether it's for drugs or nicotine or like any other thing there. It's many times it feels good in the short term, but it's really damaging in the long term there. The other thing that's interesting, look at this. Here's the prefrontal cortex, the brain's working right there. And then what happens is that when this guy went to jail because nobody liked him because every time he drank, he got violent. That just that was his normal picture. And then all of a sudden everything got heated up there. Like all the inhibitions went away. So just know that like alcohol changes our brain there. So this is a great one, but just knowing that they find that people that do drugs to get smaller brains. If the brains run the world, you're not running the world with a small brain there. It dehydrates the brain, takes away your control. They actually find studies show that alcohol makes you hate yourself. So why would you do something that makes you hate yourself and then to think that everybody will like you, so you drink more alcohol because you hate yourself, right? So just don't do it. And just know that if you're having problems like stopping, then maybe like try to start the exercises and start working. And I put a lot of good things in the resources there. So drugs and alcohol damage your entire brain. There's not a part that it doesn't damage there. So just remember that. So these are the other lists, things that hurt the brain. Excessive caffeine is a really big one that people have. They're drinking too much caffeine all day long. Just to get through their day, dehydration, video games. I already went through that. Oxygen deprivation. I used to do this game when we were growing up where we'd see who could stay under the water the longest in the pool, right? That actually damages your brain. It's not a good idea. And my wife, I was always like, don't do that. And then as I'm going through this course, Dr. Amon's like, do not play the game where you go underwater and try to hold your breath. I'm like, darn it, because I can hold it for 2 minutes. That was like my one thing that I'm great at. So just know that we have a lot of brain injuries every year. But the main thing I wanted to go back to you is just remember emotional trauma is a massive trauma. It's just as bad as a car accident, or it's just as bad as doing drugs. It literally damages your brain there. And the problem is that a lot of those memories that we have, we keep reliving those traumas. And so if your brain's not weak, it's deficient, it's toxic, you're not going to have the tools that you need to be able to deal with those emotional traumas, to be able to process them right. So we can go to therapy and talk about the emotional traumas, but it's just still a trauma on the brain. And that's why I'm talking about, hey, here's the tools. Let's get our brain healthy so that we can get it strong enough so that we can process those traumas the way that they actually occurred and actually do something about it there. Oxygen, I talked about, don't hold your breath. Sleep, it's a huge one. That's where all your hormones, that's where your brain repairs itself. All the synapses redevelop there. All of our memories are consolidated. It clears out the garbage in there. We look at, as far as when they look at soldiers, they looked at their sleep rate. And what they found out is that if they got 4 hours of sleep, when they're on the target range, they were about 15% accurate, and they're 98% accurate at 7 hours. So just like shooting a target, imagine driving your car or letting your child drive their car when they're staying up late and they're not getting enough sleep and they have to get to school in the morning, right? What about you as a parent when you're not getting enough sleep? How are you going to do at work there? These are all the things that we look at, kids that aren't getting enough sleep to get ADD, right? ADHD. Like, of course, if you're not getting enough sleep. We look at depression and anxiety and obesity. These are all massive things. And so when you're like, I don't like to sleep, you got to sleep. It's a required thing for as a human being. Smoking, it damages the brain. Nicotine damages the brain. It constricts blood vessels. So literally you're suffocating your brain from oxygen there. I just actually, oh, no, I won't go into that. But I think it's about a ton of damage comes from nicotine. Caffeine is a massive one because what it does is it causes a constriction of blood vessels in your brain, and it overstimulates the brain so the neurons become damaged in your brain. Short term is great, and in fact, it can allow you to focus, but most people use it like a drug to help them adapt to a deficient lifestyle. Okay. And that's really what we want to think about, is really that if you can't go without caffeine, that means that you're addicted to it. Like if you can't start your day without caffeine because you can't think right, that means that you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're trying to take from tomorrow to get through today. And we need to really look at some of the lifestyle stuff there. This is a technology one, and I just wanted you to see this. Texting. And so there's these different waves in the brain. And so when we start looking at the texting one up here, the beta waves right here, these are going to be like your ability to focus. And so texting actually decreases our ability to focus. Actually, watching cat videos is actually it shuts down our brain. By the way, surfing Facebook actually shuts down our brain too. It's like watching a cat video. Like cat videos do nothing to your brain. Like you're just like in this catatonic state. Same thing does surfing to, oh, that was actually funny. Same thing as like Facebook, okay? So I just think this is like, if you put this picture for your kids, right, or your grandkids, like who has more fun? Person with a whole healthy brain or a person that's has a riddled brain like that? Like it's not about what feels like fun. It's like who has the better life there? And I always just say, do you want the good career? Do you want to play sports? Do you want to have better friendships, better relationships as we go through there? There was one more. Okay, here, how about this? This is OCD, like super fixated on something. That person that's out there checking, spelling, counting, cleaning, they're worrying about everything. You can see that that's what the OCD brain is. It's not that they have a problem. It's that cingulate gyrus is fired up on those OCD people. On one of my classes recently, I talked about my mother-in-law that vacuums every single night in the dark, so the light on the vacuum can see every hair from the cat on the floor every single night. She does that. Well, the reason being is that she's like stuck in a place of worry, and that anterior cingulate gyrus is up there. ADD, we talked about that. Anxiety disorders. I want to make sure that I hit the couple things that were really important there. Good. I want to go back to this. When we're grateful for the things that we have, not only is our life better, but everybody else's life is better. We're always in search of the next great thing. Does that make sense? We're always like, I need a bigger house. I need a bigger car. I need more friends. I need more money. I need more. We're just not grateful for the things that we have. And if we're not, it puts us into a place of fear and stress. And like I said, it's damaging our brain. But you'll never find happiness in the things that you don't have, okay? You'll find happiness in the things that you have, and that comes from your gratefulness. And so I think one of the exercises I put in there is like when you wake up the first thing in the morning, whatever's happening, just be grateful for one thing. Just like think the first thing that comes to your mind, I'm grateful for this. And what it'll do is it'll actually take your brain out of that fearful stress place. But what do most people do? Oh my gosh, I'm late for work. It's another day at the job. I got to do this, right? So if you're ever feeling like you're stuck, start counting your blessings, right? Has anybody ever heard that? Count your blessings. Like, have you ever met somebody that like is counting their blessings that they're like miserable? No, it's the people that don't count their blessings that are miserable, right? Okay. We talked fearful and grateful. We talked in your handout. There's something called automatic negative thoughts. Okay, and automatic negative thoughts are the things that like crawl all over you. Like they're just like the things that crawl over you. There's a handout in there, and it's an exercise I'm going to really encourage each of you to do. That will calm your brain. It'll take that stress off that prefrontal cortex. It'll get that worry part of that anterior cingulate gyrus calmed down there. But I just like basically the main thing that you have to realize is every thought that you have is incredibly powerful. It's making an imprint on your brain. It makes a chemical, and so every thought can change how you feel. I always think about it this way: has anybody ever had a great day and then one bad thing happens and that just ruins the whole day, right? Like you're just, oh, the rest of my day is ruined. Well, why can't you have a bad day and have one good thought and have it go the other way, right? Because we haven't conditioned ourselves to do that, right? So the more you have these positive thoughts and start being aware of the things that you're thinking, the better that you'll start to feel. I'm only going to talk about this for a second, but these are what we call some of the ants. The whole class will laugh at me when I do my presentation, right? Does anybody have that when they were like a kid in school, right? Well, what if you change that thought to, I don't know that, but maybe they'll really like my speech. Do you think you'd do something? By the way, stress decreases your prefrontal cortex and decreases your temporal lobe, which is memory. Has anybody ever had test anxiety and they go take a test and they totally fail it, right? So that's just knowing that fear of going into there decreases your ability to remember things and to be able to focus in your class. Think about that. What if we just like helped our kids realize that? But that fear comes in, the whole class will laugh at me. I'm going to fail the test. Well, maybe that's not true. Maybe I'll actually do good on this test because I put the time and the effort into it. There's a whole list of things for nutrition that I want you to look through. I'm actually going to do a whole brain health nutrition class that's just going to be on a webinar you guys can watch. But I do want you to know that there's something called dinosaur syndrome, which is that the more obese somebody is, there's an inverse relationship to the size of their brain. Literally, the more weight somebody has, the more their brain shrinks. Okay. So that's a massive thing because the blood flow has to go somewhere and it's going to go away from the brain there. This was elevated BMI associated with decreased blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. So the more obese somebody is, the less blood flow they have to the executive decision making to make good decisions. And so what do? They eat the cookie instead of the apple, right? And they lose less and less control. So if somebody and I put some in the handouts that are in there, there's something on making, like if you have struggles with food, things that you can do to strengthen your brain to be able to help your body make better decisions with food there too. Healthy diet, by the way. They found that if you eat the rainbow, they can change your brain function and your scans within 8 minutes. Okay? But imagine if you do it the other way. So here's a scan of somebody that had a junk food diet, and this is when they changed their diet. Look what they did to their kids. So imagine if you're a kid, you're just feeding them fishy crackers and garbage and In-N-Out and Big Macs and stuff like that. They're kids, they're fine, right? And you can't figure out why they're doing it in school, so you put them on medications or whatever, and you're like, they're getting into trouble, and then now they're drinking. Well, what if we had started their life out like that? And that's why I'm so passionate about nutrition. I'm so passionate about the 5 essentials. And the problem is who has the worst diet? It's usually kids, right? We as we're adults, we want to at least try to do better. But remember, our habits that we learn as kids are how we live as adults there. So the brain needs proper nutrition to develop. Food dyes, they impair our brain function. Look at this. This is before, and then they gave them food dyes, and look what happened to their brain. Red dye number 5. We all know that is directly attributed to like ADD, ADHD. There's so many food dyes that will impact our brain. So we have to become safer and saner about the foods that we put into ourselves if we're having problems like struggling. But my rules are, I put a whole bunch of brain healthy food rules in there. But I just want to make sure that you're exercising, weight training, moving, because basically the amount of exercise that you have right now predicts how much brain you actually have as you get older. So if you don't move, that brain is not going to make new neurons, and the brain is actually going to atrophy there. I talked about table tennis, one of the best ones there. It does blood flow, everything that you can imagine. And then But wait, there's one other thing I wanted to make sure that I hit here. New learning is going to be a big one for you. I want you to learn new things. Learn something new every day. Just don't keep reading the same books. Read different books. Don't watch the same. Like like on your cell phone, if you get the shorts, they keep on coming up with the same type of videos. Learn something new. Learn a different language. The more that you can do something different, the more neurons you're going to have there. The biggest thing that I'm going to suggest is there's a book called Mindset, one of my favorite books. But what it says is that you praise your children for their persistence, right? Persistence and being able to overcome something, be able to fight through something there. And if you praise them for their persistence, they're going to persist through and learn how to get through things. I was telling somebody today, I had when I was a kid, I had this toy that I broke. I brought it to my dad. And my dad, I'm like, Dad, can you fix this? And he's like, no, throw it in the garbage. And I'm like, no, can you fix this? He's like, no, throw it in the garbage. And he took it and threw it in the garbage. Well, oppositional, right? I went and got it out of the garbage and picked it. And I sat on the couch and tried to fix it. And I fixed it. And I showed it to him like, see, I did it. He goes, oh, really? Show me how you did that. And we spent like an hour, I remember, me showing him what I went through and how I thought about it and how I fixed it. He's like, that was really good. I really like how you didn't give up on that. What do we do as parents? Many times we're like, let me fix it for you, right? We could have fixed it in 2 seconds, but we don't allow our kids the opportunity to grow. So don't fix your kids' problems. Let them fix their problems and help them through that. This is a couple last things that I want to go through. Is spending at least 15 minutes a day learning something new. You can spend 15 minutes, just 15 minutes a day. That's all I'm asking. And that's what studies show, that if you spend 15 minutes a day learning something new, it will have a massive impact on your brain. Stay away from alcohol, right? And stay away from drugs there. Avoid the things that don't damage your brain. And then stay away from chronic stress, because it leads to all the top 10 causes of death, but it's these are all things that stress will damage the brain pretty much more than anything there. Realizing that this is what's called the Holmes scale: death of a spouse, divorce, marital separation, detention in jail, personal injury or illness, marriage. These are all the things, and it's rated in the amount of damage there that it does to our stress level there. Every single person could probably get a score of a couple hundred off of that. But just know that we have stresses. We know those things. We can't control stress, but we can bring peace to our lives using peace management and strategies there. So just know love increases gray matter. So when you're loving somebody, increase their gray matter. It decreases pain. Mozart had a concert. Did anybody ever remember Baby Mozart? Did you guys ever have that for your kids? They actually had Mozart, what they call K448. If you Google it, and there's actually a handout in there on K448, it actually stimulates brain growth. So the Baby Mozart was a thing that they sold to stimulate learning in kids, and you played it to them every day, they would get actually smarter. If you just listen to it, it'll actually make your brain smarter there. So here's how we're gonna end this. Today is gonna be a great day, okay? Why do you think I say happy day? Like I say happy day every day. I could say, are you having a crappy day today? You know what I mean? It's happy day. When I see it, it's about something about my brain there. And one thing that I'm grateful for today, and one person I appreciate, and I'm going to let that person know. Imagine how different the world would be, how different our brains would feel if we just did those 3 things on a daily basis. It doesn't have to get more complicated than that. So if you're feeling like you're overwhelmed, great. Just start with that and try that for a month and see how that works for you. And you'll feel it'll calm your brain down, that start to work. And then we start to add in other strategies, maybe changing some of our nutrition. And there's all the nutrition handouts are in your packet there. Maybe try to take some supplement for some of the areas that are weak there. And then what? What do you think is going to happen? Well, I think the best way to reduce stress is to stop screwing it up, and we'll stop screwing up our life, right? We'll stop screwing up our life and be able to do the things that we need to do. Last couple things that I want to tell you guys. You guys have probably heard me talk about BrainSpan before. We're going to be doing a BrainSpan challenge. BrainSpan is an amazing test, and I just ordered 12 of them. But basically, it tells about your impairment, your brain span, how long you're going to have a healthy brain span for. It lets you know your cognitive function, your inflammation, what your memory looks like, how fast your brain works there. And then it also looks at the things that are deficient in there. And all it does is come from a finger prick. And so if anybody's interested, they didn't come in, but just let the front desk know, put your name on a list. And we're going to do a little challenge together where I'll sit down with the people that are interested in doing it. We'll run a pre-test and a post-test there, because I want you to know that you're able to take care of your own brains and improve it in 90 days. How cool would that be? So this is one other thing. I put this, you guys will get this copy, but I would just say, like, if you don't have anything else to do and you don't know what else to do and you don't want to be grateful, did that chair break? Oh my gosh. She'll get adjusted, but I think I need to go be shorter when I talk. You okay? It's just drink water. Just start by drinking water. 70% of the planet has water rich there. And so just in closing, if anybody's a guest here and has never been checked, this would be a great opportunity to get your spine and your nervous system checked. Just talk to like the Marco or Ari at the front desk. Beautiful thing is, it's just $40. We'll check to see what your nervous system looks like, what your brain looks like. We'll look at our scans to see how your body's adapting to stress. Like I said, you guys have all the tools here. Like everything that I have, like we organized it, we put it right there. Literally, you have the next probably 6 months of learning that you can do there. But just start with those 3 that we talked about. Then add water into there, and maybe look at the nutritional thing. If they do the brain span challenge, there's hopefully you guys learned something tonight. Like have a better understanding that you're not like how you feel, it's how your brain is functioning. And if you want to change how you feel, then just change how your brain functions. And I thank you for your patience. I'm blessed that I'd be able to have you guys in my life. And if you have any questions, I'll stay around. Thank you.